Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Mastering Midlife, How to Thrive When the World Asks the Most of You. I'm your host, Mark Silverman. Today's going to be a really fun show. I have David Rendall, and we're going to talk to him about whether or not I say his name right, because that seems to be an issue. He's a stand-up comedian with a doctorate in organizational leadership. So this is going to be an interesting conversation of how a career path with such disparate credentials can be successful. His mission is to be helpful and hilarious, which I love. He wrote several books, but his most recent book is The Freak Factor: Discover Uniqueness by Flaunting Weakness, which has been my entire life. So I can't wait to get into that. He's spoken at many Fortune 50 companies, including Microsoft and AT&T. Spoke at the Air Force, at several governments. He's on almost every continent in the world, and he wears a ton of pink, which is in his bio, and it's supposed to be interesting. So I think we're going to start there. David, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So let's go. What's with the pink?
So I have three daughters. They're 17, 15, and 12. And living in a house of all women, I realized very quickly it was turning me into a woman, right? They were very invested in bringing me over to their side of things. I've had my toenails painted quite a bit, and I've had my hair done, and I've been to a lot of tea parties. And so I just started wearing a little pink in my speeches just to be silly. And it turned out to be a real good differentiator. And I started wearing a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. And now it's almost everything. It's the glasses, it's the watch, it's the wedding ring, it's the shoes and the socks and the pants and the shirts. And it's a great way to stand out. It's a great way to practice what I preach when I talk about being different and being unique. And it's a great way as a business owner to have people come up to you and say, hey, what are you up to? And so it's turned out to be just really good in a variety of different ways. And it pushes the boundaries too of what people think is manly and, societally normal or acceptable for men to wear. And it gets people thinking differently. For now, in the month of October, people all assume it's breast cancer awareness, which it certainly does have that element, but I do it year round, not just in that month. So in that month, people feel better about it because they're like, oh, I can put it in a category, right? I can put it in a box.
Sure.
And I can explain it to myself. It's harder for them in the other months of the year to understand what's going on.
Thanks. And you do triathlons and all kinds of manly stuff just to balance the whole, balance the estrogen with a little bit of testosterone, right?
Yeah, well, when I do the triathlons, though, I have my pink bike and a pink helmet and pink sunglasses and all that, so just to keep it going. So we've invested a lot in the pink.
So let's talk about this using your weaknesses, because you talk about not trying to fix your weaknesses. How do you work with that? How do you start that conversation?
So, I mean, I just usually start by sharing my story. I was always in trouble as a kid because I couldn't sit still and be quiet and do what I was told. And my parents, my teachers, even eventually as an adult, my employers, Dave, you got to sit still, be quiet, and do what you're told. And so I thought I needed to sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told. I just couldn't. And now as an adult, I'm a professional speaker. I get paid to stand up, not to sit down. I get paid to talk, not to be quiet. And I get paid to run my own business, not to do what other people tell me to do. And I also grew up in an environment with very strict dress codes, where they taught me that if you dress right and you dress properly, that's what leads to success in life. And now I flaunt all of those things as well. So I just learned that my weaknesses were strengths. And I started to wonder if other people have weaknesses that are strengths as well. And I found that they do. And I think pretty much all of us do. And I found some pretty surprising and interesting examples of how that's true on sort of a large scale. For example, billionaires and entrepreneurs who have dyslexia. And everything we know about dyslexia says those people shouldn't even be slightly successful. They should be total failures, and yet they're massively successful, not just a little bit. And so once I figured out that this was true, not just for me, but for everybody, I wrote an assessment, wrote a book, and I'm on a mission to make sure everybody understands this, because I think too often we're trying to get better, or we're trying to help other people get better, and we're just using the wrong approach, which is the approach that we've all been taught by our parents, teachers, and employers, which is find what's wrong and fix it, and you'll be more successful. And my success, and I think really most people's success when it comes down to it, isn't from fixing the weakness. It's from realizing there's a corresponding strength and maximizing that upside that most people don't even see.
So tell me about the assessment, because I didn't want that to slip by, because it seems like a great little nugget for the listeners to go find you.
Yeah. So it's in the book. It's right on my website as well. I think it's something we'll link to at the end of the show. It's just, it's really simple. It's 3 pages. So the first page is a list of 52 strengths, because I think it's easier sometimes, instead of imagining your strengths, just to kind of pick from a list. And so you pick your top 5 from that list. And then there's another page with 52 weaknesses, and you pick your top 5 from that list. And then you go to the last page, and it has the weakness and the strength right next to each other, showing you how the weakness has a corresponding strength. And you see how probably one of those weaknesses you picked, you also picked the strength in your top 5, and you see that they're connected, that they're related to the same thing. So a simple example that's the easiest to understand is, let's say page 1, you picked the strength of being persistent. Page 2, you said, you know what, one of my problems is I'm too stubborn. You go to page 3 and you see, oh, that's obviously the same thing. Being persistent means to stick with things longer than most people think is reasonable. To be stubborn means to stick with things longer than most people think is reasonable. And so realizing that persistence is a massive strength, even though stubbornness seems like a pretty big weakness, then everything flows out of that, seeing that those two things are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. There's no way in 2020 to be more persistent and less stubborn at the same time. People who are persistent are stubborn. We call them persistent when they win. We call them stubborn when they lose or haven't won yet. But once they have one, then we're like, oh, wow, good job being so persistent. But the whole time we were beating them up for being too stubborn and telling them they needed to do the normal thing and stop and quit and give it up because it wasn't reasonable.
So great. So so I come back with, I'm stubborn and I'm persistent.
Yeah.
What do I do with that?
Yeah. So then what you try to do is, so a bunch of things. So in the beginning, so the first part is that framework of assess that strength and weakness. The next one is to accept it, to not think, oh no, Dave, I'm going to be well balanced and well rounded. I'm going to have just the right amount of persistence to where it's never stubbornness. So the next step is acceptance, to accept that weakness and strength are connected, and to not try to fix it, to not have your goal for 2014 to be, or 2020 to be less stubborn. And the next one is even to then appreciate it, to not just accept it, to be like, wow, isn't it awesome that I'm so persistent? Let's look at all the upsides in my life and in my work and in my relationships from the persistence that I've demonstrated, instead of looking at those downsides from the stubbornness. And then we go from thinking differently about ourselves to behaving differently. So now it's time to actually amplify. So instead of my goal for 2020 is to be less stubborn, my goal for 2020 is to be more persistent. What are some opportunities where I can really tap into that strength of mine and really stick with some things that I was maybe thinking about letting go, keep going on some things that maybe I'd even dropped because other people told me to. What are situations where I can dial that up? So amplification. The next one is alignment, seeking out situations where persistence is required. Where is persistence needed? Where is persistence necessary? Where is persistence rewarded? And how can I actually try to put myself in those situations, instead of going, oh yeah, no, that's not me. I don't want to be stubborn. I'm going to draw back. So turning up the volume, amplification, trying to find the right fit, alignment, and then also avoiding. So avoiding circumstances that require a tremendous amount of flexibility, and constantly dropping things and letting things go and leaving things alone and moving on to other things. Trying to stay away from activities and environments that are going to require you to be the opposite of persistent, right? That are going to require you to be less stubborn. And then the last one is partner with people who are strong where you're weak, affiliation. So the last thing to do then is to say, wait a second, I'm really persistent. What if I could find somebody who was super flexible and knew when to let go and was willing to move and change a little bit faster? What if we teamed up and I maybe held on to some things that they let go of, but they also moved on some projects that I was willing to hold on to? What if we teamed up, and that could be a pretty great partnership?
That's incredible. So
Yeah.
I figured that out in my own life, because I'm severely ADD myself, which is
Yeah.
how my first book came out, right?
Yeah.
Only Tens is, for me, was my doctorate in how do I actually run a business? How do I actually run my life with ADD?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was on Ritalin at, in my late 40s, early 50s. I was on Ritalin
Yeah.
because we had my son tested and we found out Mark is off the charts. Like the
Yeah.
doctor said, how do you even function? I'm like, oh, that's what's going on with me, right?
Right.
But so I haven't taken Ritalin since I wrote the book. But what I realized, my taxes don't get done, my expenses don't get done, my paperwork doesn't get done, but I can't coach on Ritalin,
Yeah.
right? I'm a brilliant coach because I'm intuitive, because I'm creative. I can write, I can create content, but I can't get it out because I don't take the Ritalin. So I have an assistant. I have people in my life who actually take things across the finish line for me. Is that an example?
Yeah, a bunch of the things you said there are really crucial, right? Like Ritalin fixes some part of you, but it also damages another part of you, right? So it fixes the weakness, but it also drags down that strength, right? Wait a second, I can't coach this way. I can't express, I don't feel the same. I lose a part of myself when I fix that other part of myself. And so when I don't fix it, I can be myself, but also now there's side effects. I can't do my paperwork and my taxes. But who said I have to do my paperwork and my taxes? That's what accountants are for. That's what assistants are for. That's what friends and family are for. We can partner. We don't all have to be good at all the things, and the effort to be good at all the things often makes us less good at that thing where we really have the opportunity to really be special, to really make a difference.
Wow. So I really want to hammer home to people because I really want to drive them to your website to look at this assessment,
Yeah.
because episode 99 is Michael Allen Tate, and his specialty is helping people career transition.
Yeah.
And his big thing is, before you go try and find a job, figure out who you are.
Absolutely.
And I think about my son. My older son knows who he is, knows what he likes to do, knows his skills, right, and plans things out and executes on it. My younger son is a lot more like me, a little bit more ricochet rabbit, a little more creative, and a little more charming, right? Obviously.
Right.
But he's having trouble at 19 figuring out what he wants to do. So
Yeah.
I love, and he's got ADD, and he's a brilliant teacher. So I love the thought of coupling what you're saying with what Michael Tate says with the career transition. So I'm going to kind of interchange these two things. I just think it's really
Yeah.
useful for people in business, because so many people are in jobs they hate because they're trying to fix like they think they have to work on their problems to get better rather than really move towards their strengths.
And they may have to in that job, right? So that's part of alignment, is not saying what's a good job. There's no such thing as a good job. There's only a good job for you, right?
Love it.
And so sometimes somebody might say, well, Dave, that's ridiculous. In order for me to get from here to there, from here to where I want to be to achieve my goals, I'm going to have to fix certain weaknesses about myself. Absolutely. That's where alignment comes in. Well, but what if you changed your goals? What if you set goals deliberately? What if, to your point, before you even tried to change careers, you made sure that the career you were choosing was a good match for who you fundamentally were, that tapped into the best parts about you, that didn't demand too many of the worst parts of you to be better? Then that's a better goal. So it's not that we don't set goals, it's that we have to take into account who we are before we start thinking about where we're going. And that's a really crucial part. Somebody, your mom or your friend or your business colleague might say, oh, this is a great opportunity, but it's not a great opportunity for you. It's a great opportunity for someone else. I mean, that's where we get stuck. Well, it pays well. It's prestigious. It's whatever. Well, that's got nothing to do with it. The question is, am I the right person to do that job? Will that be fulfilling and meaningful to me? And do I have what it takes to pull it off?
How do you advise leaders in the organization to work with their teams, to work with people who work for them, who have obvious challenges in the positions that they're in?
Yeah, it's that same model again, right? So those same 8 steps, starting all the way from the beginning of seeing that the way we're currently doing it doesn't work, all the way through assessing the person, appreciating the person, accepting the person, not trying to change the person, giving the person opportunities to amplify, trying to find that right fit. Maybe the person shouldn't be in sales, they should be in marketing. Maybe they shouldn't be in marketing, they should be in accounting. Maybe they shouldn't be managing people, they should be an individual performer. Maybe they shouldn't be an individual performer, they should be managing people. Maybe they shouldn't be out front, maybe they should be back office, looking to say, is the person broken, is there something wrong with them, or are they just in the wrong spot? And even as parents, right, am I judging my child by where they are, not by who they are? And so I walk leaders through that same process. Are you giving people opportunities to really amplify who they are? Are you helping people find the alignment? Are you giving people the opportunity to stop doing things that they don't do well? For example, if you were working for someone else, would they have had the insight to say, wait a second, Mark absolutely crushes it on the content and on the coaching. What if I paid somebody $10 an hour to do his paperwork and to fill out his forms? And that's actually a real story. Like from my book, one of my students was a salesperson for State Farm. She was absolutely crushing it, but she couldn't do her paperwork. And instead of trying to fix her boss just hired someone to do the paperwork. And then her sales took off, her happiness took off, her success took off. The agent made tons of money, and had plenty of money to pay someone to fill out some forms. And by the way, that person did it really well. And by the way, that person couldn't sell anything to anybody.
Right.
Right. And so yeah, the same process. It just depends on whether you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it with another person. Even one of the examples I use is a guy named Thorkill Son, and he noticed that his son had autism, and that two of the symptoms were hyper focus and doing the same thing over and over again. And Thorkill Son worked in the software industry, and he saw that in software testing, employees needed to have hyper focus and be able to do the same thing over and over again. And he said, wait a second, not just how do I find the right fit for my son, how do I create the right fit for my son? And so we actually started a business called Specialister, and it means the specialists in Danish. And all they do is software testing, and they only hire people with autism to do it. And they've been so successful that the global software company SAP is now looking for hundreds of people with autism from all over the world to do software testing for them. So he was so clear that the weakness was also a strength in the right situation. That's alignment, that he actually created the situation. He said, wait a second, what if I made this situation instead of, hoping that someone else is going to do it for me? So that's the power of from the outside being a person who, with your employees, with your partner, with your spouse, with your children, you're always looking to help people find the right fit instead of judging people based on where they currently are as though that defines them.
Wow, what a great dad that guy is, and
Yeah.
a creative genius.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the story of is it Greta Thunberg, the young lady who's the climate change
Yeah.
spearhead now in the world. She talks about the fact that if it wasn't for her autism, she doesn't know if she would be single-threaded purpose the way she is, be able
Yep.
to ignore all the critics because she's so hyper focused on this. So it is pretty incredible that you can use those what they call detriments to actually be your gifts and your genius.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So what about the people who get criticized constantly by their family, like someone who's chronically late, and the outside world is criticizing you for and especially like the ADHD. Like if you're married, your spouse is going to criticize you for your ADHD because you leave your glasses all over the house, right? And why isn't there silverware in the silverware drawer? Like they're all downstairs by the TV. Well, how do you work with people to help them get kind of enroll people into this whole, no, that's my genius?
Well, it goes all the way back to the assessment. I mean, when I do the assessment in groups, that's the number one question. Can I take this home to my spouse? Can I get an extra copy for my partner? I designed one for kids because people are like, oh, this would be great for my kids. So it's sitting down with that other person and showing them that your weaknesses are strengths, but also that their weaknesses are strengths. So that's oftentimes what we love to bring home is, hey, I don't have to put the silverware away. And then the other person gets to go, oh, well, then you have to remember acceptance. You have to accept this thing that you're always complaining about with me. So the first step in the process always starts with realizing that whatever that weakness is, there's a corresponding strength. If we just say, not putting away the silverware is bad, good people put away silverware, my spouse or partner doesn't put away the silverware, and I'm going to be frustrated until they get better, none of the other steps work. It only works when you can say, oh, so for example, this was a revelation for me, and it took a long time, because my wife is always late, and it's very frustrating to me. And I always thought, it's just a good or bad, right and wrong kind of thing. And that if I was clear enough with her about how much it bothered me, a good, loving person would fix it. And she never did. And so obviously she's a terrible person. And then one of her friends on Facebook posted one of those little old-fashioned, old-timey cards that they do sometimes that has like a little silly phrase or saying on it. And so it's this lady dressed up in this old-fashioned gown or whatever. And she said, it's better to show up late than to show up ugly. And that was what I needed to be able to see what the upside is. My wife isn't late because she's sitting at home in her pajamas with her feet up on the couch, snacking on Doritos. My wife is late because she was trying to get 17 different things done before she picked up the kids, before she went to the store, and once she did those 17 things, then she was also uncompromising about taking a shower, doing her hair, putting on something cute, doing her makeup, brushing her teeth, flossing her teeth.
Right.
Whereas I would sacrifice all of those good things in order to be on time, which is another good thing. But if she wanted to, and she has, she'd say, yeah, but you're wearing yesterday's clothes. You didn't brush your teeth. You didn't take a shower. There's 3 things you left undone. You didn't put your bowl back in the sink, et cetera, et cetera. So what we don't acknowledge oftentimes is that being on time requires us to sacrifice other things. Late people are oftentimes simply unwilling to sacrifice those things, or they're so optimistic about all the things they can accomplish that they think they can get them done. And also it's a, yeah. So it all starts with saying, and that's one of the biggest examples I give in my speeches is I talk about these 2 people who got married because they were attracted to the qualities the other person had that they didn't have. Opposites attract. And then those same qualities started to repel them because they stopped seeing them as strengths and started seeing them as weaknesses. So the foundation of all of it is being able to say, my spouse or partner doesn't put the silverware away, but that's because they are so creative and interesting. And that's what I love about them. And I don't care if they don't put the silverware away, because I put the silverware away because I'm organized and structured. And that's one of my things anyway. We all don't have to be good at the same things. And because I value, that's appreciation, not just acceptance, because I value what they do bring to the table so much, I'm going to let the other stuff go because, and this goes back to acceptance, I can't have this without this. My wife is structured, but she's inflexible. And you might say, well, wouldn't it be great if someone could just be structured, but never be inflexible? But that's not what structure is. Structure is inflexibility. Physically, the wall right behind me, I can't just move it because if I do, the house falls down. It's structured, that therefore it's inflexible. But if I've got a curtain, I can move that back and forth because it's not very structured, therefore it's more flexible. So it's recognizing that every characteristic, no matter how good or how bad, comes with an opposite, and that you don't get to have the one without the other. And it's accepting that, and not just accepting it for long-term success in your relationship, it's appreciating it and saying, wow, even though my wife frustrates me sometimes because of her inflexibility, it's really nice to live with somebody who's so structured, and the dishes are always done, and the laundry's always done, and the house is always clean, and the exterminator's always called, and the plumbing's always taken care of, and the bed is always made. That's nice. And yeah, there's some other sides to that story, but if I had somebody who wasn't structured, at some point I'd be like, why are there pizza boxes everywhere and blah, 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 blah. So I'd fix the problem, but I'd create a new problem. Right.
Got it. Okay, so we've saved the corporate world with making sure people are in their right jobs. We've saved a couple of marriages on this show,
Yeah.
which, by the way, thank you for speaking all about my ex-wife, so I didn't have to. Right? Because I was going to bring that up as an example, and I thought that isn't fair. And you brought up my ex-wife
There we go.
as an example because she gets so much done and cannot walk out the door because she does one more thing, right?
Yep.
And I'm so grateful for that. And so now let's save the kids. You have one of your other books is Freak Factor for Kids. That's probably the book I can read first because I can understand it. So tell us about that.
Well, it just takes the message in it and it puts it in story form, right, with pictures for kids. And so, I mean, with kids, the probably the most profound response that I got when I first wrote it was a woman named Stacy took it home to her son. His name was Leo, and he had ADHD. He was 10 years old. She gave him the book. He read it, and he wrote me a little note on a little torn piece of paper, and it said, "Thank you, Mr. Rendall, for the book. It made me feel better about who I am." Right.
Oh.
I was the first person who told him that his ADHD, the thing everybody had told him was the most worthless thing about him, was actually the best thing about him. I end my talks with this quote from E. Cummings. He said, "We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside of us something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch." And so what we have to do with kids is we have to be that person, whether we're a parent or a teacher or a coach or whatever. We have to be that person who shows that child for the first time, usually, that deep inside of them something is valuable. Almost always the thing that even we used to think was the most worthless thing about them, that it's not worthless, that it's worth listening to, that it's worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. So what we have to do, for example, alignment is hard with kids because school goes from age 5 to age 18. And if you don't fit in school, it seems like you're a bad person. But life is made up of millions of potential situations, whereas school is really only made up of one. And so we have to look for things like, oh, my kid is so dramatic, and it's like, well, yeah, there's a thing for that. It's called drama. Get your kid involved. My kid's hyperactive. Well, get him involved in sports. No coach has ever sent a kid home from practice and been like, oh my gosh, Mark, your kid just won't stop running and running and running. They're driving me crazy with all the hyperactivity. And so we have to be smart enough as parents, but also think about Thorkill Swan creating a whole business. We have to be industrious enough as parents too, to instead of saying, well, this is just the way the world is and my kid doesn't fit, so they're going to have to change, where we say, no, there is a spot in the world and I'm going to find what that is. I'm going to create it if it doesn't exist. And I see those strengths and I'm going to find a way to help them tap into that. And so we have to be creative sometimes in order to do that. But instead of saying, my kid has to fit in and my job as a parent is to teach them how they have to shave all these different parts off of them in order to be the right kind of person, we say, no, I'm going to show them how they can create a life in which their best strengths are used and their weaknesses become irrelevant. And I think that's the way we help kids. That's the way we change schools. That's the way we change a world in which, a kid just yesterday committed suicide because his classmates outed him online for being gay. And the shame that he felt and the concern that he had about acceptance and belonging caused him to kill himself. And that's why the subtitle of the book is Discovering Uniqueness by Flaunting Weakness. Flaunting means to parade without shame. It means to not let other people, through their criticism, define who we are or who we can be, and being unapologetic about who we are and not letting other people frame who we are as a negative just because it's different, just because it's unusual.
It's so moving, on so many levels. On a business level, it's so practical, and on a healing human level, it's so moving. I love your work. I really do. It's interesting for my own business. I've done really well, and I kept doing really well, but I wasn't breaking through to where I wanted to be until I decided that I was going to be me. And part of me is, I end my podcast with "I love you." I was doing videos on Facebook, and I would think, like, am I an idiot? Like, every single old sales manager I used to work with is going to see me on LinkedIn saying "I love you," and and talking about spirituality and all that within the realm of business and all this, and how important all that is. And when I finally started focusing on midlife, the people that I cared about, telling the truth about the fact that I know what's behind the Instagrams, behind the LinkedIns, that people who look like me are killing themselves in record numbers. We can't handle the stress of being in the 1%. My business took off. Like, it took off. My practice filled as soon as I flaunted who I really am, because I always thought it was too soft. I always thought it was too loving. I thought it was too feminine to love, to care, and all that. And it shifted everything.
Yeah. Well, then notice what's happening, right? Is people wanted to turn that uniqueness into a weakness, right? Too soft, too feminine, so I love that. So that's amplification. What I always tell people, if somebody tells you you're too fill in the blank, ask yourself, what would happen if I dialed it up even farther, right? I'm not too much. I'm going to take it even to another level. Like just this weekend, I did my 5th Ironman triathlon. When I finish those, I always get a flood of text messages and voicemail messages and Facebook messages from people who are encouraging me and are inspired. And basically they're praising me and rewarding me for being very, very, very active. It took me 14 hours and 45 minutes. That's a pretty high level of activity. What's interesting is when I was a kid, and you know this, and you're very, very, very active, what do they call it? They call it hyperactive. They pathologize it as ADHD, and they give you medicine that fixes it. So my whole life, I got criticized and punished for being very, very, very active. This is crucial. And then I got more active, and people said, oh, wow, that's amazing. Good job.
Oh, that's brilliant. So you give me permission to double down.
Yeah. And so when somebody tells you, oh, Mark, you're too soft, you're like, whoa, right? Too feminine. You're too fill in the blank. You're too compassionate. It's too fuzzy. It's too, you need to be tougher. You need to have a thicker skin. You need to, and that's one of the strength weakness combinations, is that people are sensitive and caring, but people say they're too vulnerable and emotional. Well, when I try to become less vulnerable and emotional, I have to become less sensitive and caring. Even just think about it in a physical sense. If you get hurt and I'm helping you and somebody says, whoa, Dave, be careful. You might get some of Mark's blood on you, and you have no idea when you're dealing with another person. You have to protect yourself. As soon as I put on gloves, what happens to my level of sensitivity? It goes down. Certainly, I've protected myself, but I've
Right.
also reduced my sensitivity. And that same thing happens interpersonally. If I'm going to protect myself, I literally have to I figuratively have to put up walls. I have to reduce that connection between me and that other person. And so when people are telling you you're too sensitive, caring, compassionate, all those things, you're like, you know what? When that's the thing you hear the most, that's when you're like, yep. So I'm going to build a business around that. I'm going to
Right.
crank it up. I'm going to be more loving, more caring, more compassionate, more open, more vulnerable. And when you were, people were like, oh, and part of what you're talking about with Instagram and Facebook and those kind of things is that it is being apologetic. It isn't flaunting. It's let me tell people what I think they want to hear. Let me put on a show that I think people want to see. Let me be the kind of person that I think other people wish I was. And when you break that mold and go, nope, this is me and I don't care. And if you don't like it, then it's probably not for you. People are like, oh, you can do that? That's an option I didn't know. And so you're giving them permission to be someone that they didn't know that they could be.
Brilliant. I love all this. So the call to action to everybody in the car who's sitting in the car, not going into work because they have to listen to the end of this, is when you go into work today, if you're ADD, you're more ADD today. If you're late, stay in the car a little longer. If you're a
No,
neat freak, go organize somebody else's desk and just embrace and love your uniqueness and your weaknesses.
now, one quick caution so we don't get people fired. So one lady came back from class one time because I did a little bit of the freak factor and we didn't finish. And she came back and she said, I had my job evaluation. And I told my boss, these are my weaknesses and he doesn't like it. That's too bad because I'm not going to change. Remember alignment, right? So you only get to, if you're late, you can go later, but you're probably going to get fired. The goal is find a job where timeliness isn't crucial,
Right.
right?
It's how much you get done when you get it done.
Yeah, yeah. Where there's flexibility around time, and that 8 o'clock doesn't really matter as much as, but when you're the one opening the store, it does matter at Burger King or something like that. And so there are some situations in which timeliness isn't crucial. Then there's other ones where it is, right? If you're an airline pilot, showing up an hour late every day isn't cute. It's a big problem. So that alignment piece is huge. Finding an environment that rewards you for whatever that corresponding strength is. You don't necessarily get to walk into the existing situations that you're in and expect people to be excited about your weaknesses, because oftentimes those weaknesses are too relevant in that situation. You have to do the hard work of, like you said, from your last guy, learn more about yourself, look at how and where you've been successful, and then either design or find environments like that and gradually start taking those steps. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. So what's next for you? What's exciting that's coming up that you want to promote?
Well, we realize that businesses have weaknesses that are also strengths, right? So a fun one real fast is I was walking through Target and there was a book called P is for Pterodactyl. I was like, well, that's a terrible way to teach kids about how letters work, right? And then I looked at it more closely and that's exactly what it said. It said the worst alphabet book ever, right? So it was like K is for night, like an old fashioned night. T is for tsunami. And so what we talk about in Pink Goldfish, which is the new book we did on marketing and strategy, is how the freak factor works in organizations as well. Your organization doesn't have to be perfect. You can flaunt your flaws in an organization. We talk about a company whose cough syrup tastes terrible. Instead of trying to fix that, they brag about how awful it tastes and actually compare it to things like trash bag leakage and sweaty gym socks. And so we talk about how flaunting your weaknesses can work within organizations as well. And it's a great way to stand out from the crowd, because just like people do on Instagram and Facebook, they lie and put up a fake facade about who they are, and businesses do too. And so they have no trust and no real relationship, and they've all kind of homogenized. And when you'll step out of that and say, this is who we are, for better or for worse, this is what we do and this is what we don't do, this is what we're good at and this is what we're bad at, people find that massively attractive. So for example, later this month, I'm speaking at the Nebraska Tourism Conference, because their slogan for Nebraska tourism used to be Nebraska nice. And guess what? Nobody went to Nebraska. Now their slogan is Nebraska, honestly, it's not for everyone. And the interest in Nebraska has absolutely exploded. They're on the late shows. They're in the New York Times. People are like, wait a second, maybe it is for me. What are you talking about? What's going on there? Who would do that? Every community, every state, every place is like, we've got something for everyone. No, you don't. And when somebody had the courage to tell the truth, it was massively attractive, right? So we share stories like that about companies who've had the courage to do things differently, to stand out by breaking the rules of what people currently define as good and right and strong in a particular industry or particular business. And we're talking a lot about that, and it's really exciting and really fun. And we find examples every single day that just keep reinforcing that idea and that are really funny and really interesting.
So that branding marketing book is Pink Goldfish.
Called Pink Goldfish, yeah.
Again, that'll be on the show notes, and I really suggest that you get this. David, thank you
Yeah.
so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
This was in so many superlatives I can give you for what you share and what you do in the world. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
And to everybody else, as I told David, I love you guys. I appreciate your time and attention. Have a great rest of the day, and now go into work and celebrate. Take care.